I was just watching yesterday Sam Kinnison's stand-up bit about Jesus' wife. Jesus goes off with the disciples, and he's gone for 3 days. And he comes back, and she's giving him crap for being gone. And he's like, I was dead! I was fighting Satan in hell! It's hysterical. I don't think anything is off limits. And maybe especially with religion.
I've never been a super religious person. Despite being raised religious, I was always kind of bored by it. And as an aspiring comedian, I always loved making jokes about it. Recently, there was a death in my family, and I got to meet this reverend who spoke at the funeral. And I was really surprised by him. Not only did he make church really interesting, he told me he loves comedy, he has tattoos, a bunch of toys in his office, and a huge knowledge of contemporary pop culture. Just not something you'd expect out of somebody who's so religious. So I'd asked if he'd be down to let me interview him about religion and comedy. And I think the conversation was pretty cool. So here it is, folks. So you said it's Dr. Reverend Evan Dodge, which I'll say just once.
Yeah, just once.
Okay.
Just once. I feel weird if
all
being
right.
referred to by my titles.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, so I asked you to do a little interview because I came to church with my mom recently. And
Right.
I've been coming to church my whole life. And for the first time, I was enjoying it because you're a very good public speaker. You're inspiring.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. And then, we had a death in the family, and you
Right.
spoke at the funeral. But we got to speak to you before that, and you were just a cool guy. You like comedy. You're not what I
Love
thought.
comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, how did you get into, I guess, being a reverend? Is that how I would say it?
Yeah. Well, I was in college. I was studying to be a history teacher. I wanted to
Okay.
teach high school history, and I love history. That was my college degree, and I just grew up in the church, grew up around ministers, and always loved public speaking. And found a little. So I'm United Methodist. Found a little Methodist church in Maine when I was in college, and I thought, boy, I could see myself, doing this, and I loved the connection with people, and found that I was a good listener, particularly, people going through difficult times. It was reflected back to me that I had something I could offer them. And so just kind of went down that route. And I was a kid in school, man, like 3rd and 4th grade, where like time for book report. I could not wait to get in front of the class and like give my book
Right.
report. So like I always, public speaking was never something that I shied away from or made me really nervous or, so it's just a good fit, man.
Were you always religious?
Yeah, I mean, I went through times as a teenager and in college where I kind of, asked questions, the big questions that, so much suffering in the world. How can God be good? Is there really a God? So I went through that for sure. But I would say I always got drawn back to the church. There was just something about it
Interesting.
that I just could not, as much as I tried at times to escape, I just couldn't get away from it.
So then what is your doctorate in?
So I have a Doctor of Ministry degree,
Okay.
which is really for, kind of like if you're an artist, like an MFA is kind of your ultimate degree, or in the business world, MBA.
Okay.
A D-Min, not to be confused with a demon.
Okay.
A D-Min, D-M-I-N, is kind of the ultimate professional degree for a clergy person.
That's interesting how it sounds like demon.
It does sound like demon, doesn't it? So that's why sometimes I spell it out for people. Or
Right.
try to enunciate very clearly, because some people may think I have a demon, but I
Right.
actually have I have a D-Min. In addition to being a minister, I also teach at a university. I just adjunct a course a semester. So when I teach, I actually teach in the literature department.
Okay.
At a school. I teach the literature of the Bible, which is really a lot of fun because I brought in like stand-up and different things. Because it's the purpose of the course is to show how the Bible has really influenced the Western canon and arts and humanities and
Okay.
everything. And I mean, you can look at stand-up, you can look at TV shows, books, art, comic books, and you can kind of see, how the Bible influences really all the Western canon.
So you've read the Bible from front to back, or?
I have a few times.
Yeah?
I have a few times, yeah.
How long does that
It's
take?
pretty wild.
Yeah?
Well, I have a couple Bibles here in my office that are like designed to take you through the whole Bible in a year.
Okay.
So you can do it that way. You can just sit down and read. Depending at your pace, you can do it relatively quickly.
What's like the most surprising thing that you feel like people would walk away thinking if they read the Bible?
Oh, that's a really great question. So I've been going through the Bible again in a year, and man, you get into some of the history books in the Old Testament. think, boy, if they tried to make the Bible into an HBO series, it would be like more intense than Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Or stuff. I mean, the sex and the violence and like the incest
Really,
and all
yeah.
this stuff. I think the Bible is really interesting in that it does not kind of tidy up human messiness. Right. It just kind of throws it all out there. And so maybe more to your question. Here's a common misconception I think people come to the Bible is that just because something is in the Bible doesn't mean that it's sort of condoned as a good thing, right? So people come to the Bible supports this and that. Well, it really doesn't if you read it carefully.
Right.
The Bible records a lot of horrible stuff, but that doesn't mean that, God or the earliest religious folks who are recording the Bible are saying this is a good thing,
right?
So that's kind of I think a misconception that when it comes to the Bible, but it just lays the grouseness and messiness of humanity out there,
right?
And if you get like the books of Joshua and Judges, so that's when the Israelites kind of go into what's called the Promised Land, and some of the things that happen are just, there's a story of. One of my wife's favorite stories in the Bible of a woman driving a tent peg through a guy's head to kill him. And then like the next chapter, there's like this song of almost like like a tribute song to this woman for killing this guy.
Right.
And it's like, kind of included in all its gory details of, body parts spilling out and all this stuff. It's pretty interesting, man.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in the Bible I think would surprise most people who haven't spent much time with it.
It's funny. It kind of reminds me of I took like this class about like Shakespeare, and we'd read stuff, and people would be like, "Oh, like, somebody said this. Shakespeare was racist." It's like, no, the character was racist.
Sure.
Like, just because they said this thing doesn't mean that's what he thought.
Right.
It's just
right.
that is what the character is saying. Or like Michael Scott in The Office, he might say something terrible, but that doesn't mean they're saying that's we're laughing at him.
Sure, yeah. Well, and I think in the same way you can run a parallel between parts of the Bible and, say, The Office. A lot of it's social commentary.
Right.
Like good stand-up, good comedy.
Yeah.
A lot of it is social commentary. It's meant to satirize, right? Or it's meant to poke fun at, or it's meant to expose a weakness in human beings or human behavior, human thought. And so it's not, again, like it's not holding these things up as good.
Right.
It's a commentary on humanity.
So how did you get into liking stand-up? I guess just like everybody else, or like...
Yeah, I've always loved humor. Again, going back to being a kid in 3rd and 4th grade, like giving my book report, I'd like try to sneak some jokes in there.
Right.
Like it could be like I start, with a knock-knock joke or something dumb. But I loved making people laugh. It felt good, right?
Yeah.
I think there's like an endorphin rush.
Yeah.
Like when you're in front of people and they're laughing at something you're saying, it feels good.
Yeah.
So I think, getting into stand-up, and like I watch a lot of stand-up. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I don't know. Just funny.
Who do you like?
I like certain people. Well, Richard Pryor is my favorite of all time. Probably Pryor. I love Sam Kinison. We've talked about Kinison.
Yeah.
He was a Pentecostal preacher.
Right, you were saying that.
Yeah. So that way, you can see that kind of come out. If you've ever spent much time with like Pentecostal preaching, it is a unique style of preaching. And you can see that in his comedy. Like the famous bit about, food in the desert, right?
Right.
When so like he kind of starts quiet and then he just starts screaming, right? Like that emphatic that kind of takes you by surprise. That's a common cadence in certain styles of Pentecostal preaching.
So preaching has styles.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just like stand-up has styles, preaching has, lots of variation of style.
What would you say your style is?
I try to be conversational. Yeah.
Okay.
If you think of preaching, maybe you're thinking of, a big church with a big pulpit and the preacher standing behind the pulpit and giving the sermon. And there are some preachers who excel in that and give a great sermon. That's just not my style. I don't stand behind a pulpit. I don't use notes. I don't write my sermon. I actually come down into the congregation and preach, because I kind of think of a sermon as a journey, right? That we're kind of going through a text from the Bible together, and we're on a journey together through it. And that, to me, that image of being together, instead of me kind of being separate from the people and me telling them what it means, we're gonna have a conversation about it together, and so that's kind of my style.
So you don't prepare at all, like yesterday. You had a service. Like, do you?
Right.
You don't like prepare beforehand?
Oh, I certainly prepare, but I don't write my sermon. I take notes. I've got an iPad behind me with I use the Notes app, and I have tabs for every week. And so I'll go through, I'll read the text, I'll read commentaries, I'll listen to other sermons on the same text, and I'll make notes, and I'll kind of organize my thoughts.
Right.
And I'll go over that. But I don't take anything with me on Sunday morning to the worship service by way of notes or a text.
Do you have off days where you're like, that's
I do.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I have days where after the sermon, I'll be like, that just sucked. It didn't land. I'll think of an illustration I used or something, and I'll be like, man, that was just misplaced. And then when people are leaving, they'll be like, man, I'm going through X, Y, Z in my life.
Yeah.
And that sermon was the thing I needed to hear. I'll be like, wow. And then I'll have Sundays where I'm like, man, that was a friggin' home run. That was a grand slam. Bottom of the ninth, 2 out. And then people will be like, hey, have a great day.
Right.
I'll be like, man, come on.
Preachers
all right.
can bomb, huh? That's cool.
Absolutely, preachers can bomb.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the bomb, and just like I'm sure in stand-up, you learn a lot from the bombing.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can kind of go back and you can kind of figure out, okay, why didn't this work when I used this illustration, or I try to make this point? Man, maybe that was just in the wrong place. Maybe if I had said what I said before I made that point, it would have, been driven home in a more concrete or productive way. So yeah, man, there's Sundays and I walk out and I'm like, that was great. Other Sundays,
right,
it wasn't so good.
Well, the very cliche question in stand-up is what was your worst bomb? So
yes.
do you have a worst bomb or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can kind of remember just preaching and remember the feeling of being because I can really tell, and this is something I've had to cultivate, but I can really tell if I have people or not.
Right.
And there have been some sermons where I'm just like, oh, they're not with me.
Right.
I can tell that they're not here. And other Sundays where I'm just like, they're right here in the palm of my hand.
Yeah.
And we can go wherever and they're going to follow me, So I can reflect on, I can't think of one particular sermon. I can remember some really bad, this has only happened twice. I've probably done 300 funerals or memorial services in my ministry career. And twice I called the person by the wrong name.
Oh, really?
Oh, that was just that was always my biggest. So the first time it happened, I was like, oh no.
Did you know right away?
Yeah, I did. Because somebody in the front row yelled out the right name.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I forgot what her name was. But the person the person was like, oh, it's so-and-so. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. So I, moved through. Now I have a book with prayers and stuff, and I'll take a pencil and I write the person's name in there.
Okay.
So that just I'd be sure that I'm not going to mess this up.
Another cliche stand-up question, what's your favorite venue that you've performed at?
That's really good because as you can imagine, church layouts are different. I've had one of my favorite is been in the round.
Okay.
There's a couple churches that I've preached in that have either been in a semicircle, like a horseshoe, or a full circle. That's really cool because I move around when I preach. I like to connect with people, make eye contact. I talk with my hands a lot. So having people kind of all around me is a really cool experience.
That's cool.
I like that. I've preached in huge buildings. I've preached in tiny buildings. One of the first churches that I served as a pastor, if you fit 40 people in, you'd be bursting at the seams.
Right.
There were 4 pews or 5 pews on either side. In the center aisle, that was it. It was a little country church out in Northwest Jersey. So it makes me preach differently depending on the space.
Right.
If I've got 10 pews and there's 18 people there, or if I've got 30 pews and there's 250 people, I'm going to preach differently.
Right.
My style, my energy, my focus, all of that can be shifted and changed depending on the environment.
What is the goal of a successful sermon or preaching? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for people to kind of leave with a sense of purpose and that God loves them and cares about them, and that that they have something that they can make it through their week.
Right.
That life is not empty and meaningless, and not just sort of this arbitrary collection of atoms, but there's purpose to all this, and people can live with renewed kind of hope. That's kind of what I want to instill in people.
Interesting. Is there ever a hope to, like, I guess, inspire, like, doubters or disbelievers to kind of believe?
Absolutely, yeah. And I would never, eschew doubt, or I think that's important. I mean, I don't think you can get to belief without going through doubt.
Right.
At least I did in my life. I still even now have periods where I doubt things. And I think any preacher or any religious person who would tell you otherwise isn't being honest.
Are there preachers that you're like, he's a sham, or like?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to name anybody, but turn on your TV and most of the ones you'll find there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think it's a big red flag when they lead with money.
Yeah. Sure.
Or there's like a big drive to recruit funds and to like connect someone's faith with that, right? Like if you're a real Christian or if you're a person of faith, you're going to send us this money and then God's going to bless you. No, come on.
Right.
I think people smell that a mile away.
Yeah, for sure.
And the thing is, those are such public religious faces and figures. Kind of screws us all over in a sense.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean? Because some people can be thinking, well, if this is what religion is like, I don't want anything to do with it. When there are what you see kind of as a sample with some of those people who are like talking heads on news programs or television preachers, that does not represent anything but a small fraction of this large religious world.
This is a weird thing to relate it to, but on the train today, you know what furries are?
Yeah.
There's people that like to dress up like animals.
Right.
There was a video where, like, I guess people always say, they like all want to have sex with animals. And it's like the girl in the video is like, no, that was like one guy, and now everybody thinks. Yes. I can see how one bad apple can taint the whole.
Right. Or, a famous television preacher in 2005 gets up and says Hurricane Katrina was because of gay and lesbian people.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, come on.
Right.
That's nonsense. So that people can see that and think, well, all religious people hate gay and lesbian people. That's nonsense, right? But all it takes is one vocal public person to kind of, cast, this shadow over all religious people. And we're not all like that.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, so as a fan of comedy,
yes,
and we were mentioning some, like,
I'll give you some more names to my favorites because I love to talk.
Yeah, well, I mean, you were even mentioning like George Carlin.
I love Carlin.
Do you like Monty Python?
Absolutely.
Oh, so I love like Life of Brian, and I'm just wondering with certain with comedians and comedy like that, especially when somebody like George Carlin was pretty vocal, I guess, about not believing in God.
Sure.
Monty Python, though, I don't think that was so much saying like Life of Brian. I don't think that was them saying God isn't real or anything. But how do you feel about that sort of comedy that talks about religion in that way?
Sure, or that some people might think is sacrilegious or something.
Yeah.
Listen, I don't think anything is off limits.
Yeah.
And of course, there are some jokes that like I'm not going to make.
Yeah.
I think anybody should be able to make a joke about anything.
Right.
I'm a big believer in free speech, but I think though that and maybe especially with religion, you need to be able to poke fun and to make jokes, right? Because I think if you can't do that with something like religion, then it can very quickly turn into sort of this austere weapon. Almost like weaponize it. And use it as something to kind of beat people with. And no, man, you got to be able to laugh and to make jokes. I was just watching yesterday Sam Kinnison's stand-up bit about Jesus' wife.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that bit?
No, I haven't.
So he's talking about Jesus and Mrs. Jesus is home, and Jesus goes off with the disciples, and he's gone for 3 days, and he comes back, and she's giving him crap for being gone. And he's like, I was dead. I was fighting Satan in hell, and it's just hysterical, right?
Yeah.
But I love that, man. You got to be able to laugh at these things. And
That's awesome.
here's one of the reasons that I love comedy in the context of religion. As you know, like religion can be a lightning rod.
Yeah.
You just mention that word or mention Christianity or mention a pastor to people, and like immediately maybe there's preconceived notions about what a minister is. Maybe people have had bad experiences in church, and church has seriously traumatized a lot of people, right? And so to me, humor is a great way it can bring defenses down. It can relax people. If they see me kind of not taking myself too seriously and making jokes and laughing, I've just found for some people that's just like, okay, I can breathe around this guy. Yeah. I may not come to believe like he believes, but maybe here's someone who can be a safe person.
Right.
And so that's one of the many reasons I love to employ comedy in preaching and in other ministry aspects, because I think that it's, first of all, I just think it's good for us. It's a good thing to laugh. Mentally, physically, spiritually, it's good. But it does something to start building a rapport of trust with somebody. And if people find me, laughing at myself, people are like, wow. I've over and over again, man, I've had people say to me, boy, you're not like any minister I've ever seen, or I didn't expect a pastor to be like this. I think that's a compliment, frankly.
It is, yeah.
I love that, because I'm just like, listen, I'm just a person with as much crap and garbage in life and doubts and everything as anybody else. I just find myself in this position where it's like, God has said to me, here, you're going to do this. And I find that I'm able to bring some hope and life and light into people's lives, and that's greatly fulfilling to me, and I trust to the people I minister to.
Yeah, I mean, especially because like if you go to church and the minister is like super holy and like doesn't like, right, you wouldn't want to make a joke around him. But
right.
Then you go home and you're making like, it's like,
yeah,
you're living two separate lives.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge, because I don't think that I don't like that dichotomy, which is what you're pointing out, which is very true in many places. Like, you're one way at church and you're a completely other way at home.
Yeah.
Like, no. But yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen that bit by Kinnison, it's really good. It's really good. He's brilliant.
Yeah, it's cool. I didn't even realize that he was a preacher. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, he was great. So I love Kinnison, Carlin. I love Norm Macdonald.
Yeah, he's great.
I love Mitch Hedberg. And again, those are like different styles, right? Just like there's different styles of preaching, with Hedberg and his delivery, like those short little quips. McDonald's delivery is very different. I love Roseanne Barr. Like, her stand-up is phenomenal.
Yeah, she's great.
So I love all those people, and I try to pull different things. There's a technique in preaching called the Lowry Loop. And Eugene Lowry was a preaching professor at a seminary in Chicago. And he talks about how you bring this tension to the biblical text, right? So you kind of bring the world's problems or our individual issues to the text, and you create this tension. So like, how is this going to be resolved? And then you come in kind of with something unexpected that starts to resolve the tension, but it gets people to go kind of like, oh, wow, where did that come from? I had never thought of it that way before. And then you start to kind of move to resolution. It's very similar to kind of like a plot line in a story, right? You might have an antagonist and a protagonist, and you have the events in the plot, and then it kind of reaches like this tense kind of climax in the plot, and then there's resolution.
Right.
So when I think of people like Norm Macdonald, right? Like, he'll do a great lead up to a joke.
Yeah.
And then he'll give you the punchline, and you're like, whoa. Like, I didn't see that coming, Or same with Mitch Hedberg, right? He'll have those punchlines where it's like maybe 4 minutes later you get it,
Right.
And so sometimes in preaching I try to do that. Like, I'll kind of build up the tension between the biblical text or the Bible story and life, and then try to kind of reach this point where this third element comes in to help navigate these two things that seem like they're opposed, but maybe they're really not. And so there's a lot of stand-up comics who've kind of helped me in how to craft that, and especially in the delivery.
Right.
Because that's huge, right? the delivery. You know, how
absolutely.
you know your body language, how you're holding your body, your tone of voice, all of that can make a really impactful point, or it can deflate like a balloon.
Right.
You know, and so I look to a lot of stand-up comics for tips on that.
Is there anything funny in the Bible? Any like funny moment, like intentionally funny?
Oh yeah. So you know, I would just in the church calendar we just had Pentecost
Okay.
on May was last Sunday, wasn't it? May 28th, and you know, there's this point. You know, the Bible story is the Christians are gathered. This is 50 days or so after Jesus' resurrection, and the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity, kind of comes down and is dwelling among the people, and they start to speak in other languages. Now we think of tongues, you know, television preachers, blah 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 blah. You know, it wasn't quite like that.
Right.
This was other known languages that they were speaking in, so they were able to communicate and understand one another in a way they had never been able to prior. And you know, everybody's like, man, who gave these people alcohol? They must be drunk. And so Peter, you know, one of the famous disciples, stands up and starts to preach. He's like, come on, they're not drunk. And then he goes in to kind of explain what happens. There's like just a little bit of comedic humor there, right?
Right,
like,
right.
man, come on, these people are drunk.
Yeah. Like.
Yeah, and there's other moments in the Bible, if you read it kind of closely and with an eye toward this kind of comedic relief. Yeah, there are certainly moments where if you find, as I do, humor in the absurd,
Yeah.
you know, like I love absurd comedy, then you'll find a lot of material in the Bible. Because there's a lot of stuff that you're just like, oh, come on.
Do you have any favorite stories from the Bible?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love the story of Jonah.
Okay.
You know, so Jonah's kind of has this mission from God to go to Nineveh, this town of people, and to tell them that God's judgment is coming on them. And, you know, he's terrified of that, so he runs away, and this big fish swallows him up. And so there's this scene in the book of Jonah where, you know, he's on this boat, and this storm comes up, and people are like, oh, this has got to be God. He's mad at us. So there's got to be somebody here in the boat who's, you know, pissed God off. And so we've got to find out who they is. We got to find out who they is. And so they find out that it's Jonah. They throw him overboard. The fish swallows him up, takes him and spits him back on dry land, not far from Nineveh. And he's like, well, all right, I kind of learned my lesson, and I'm this close, I might as well go anyway. So he goes over to Nineveh, and he kind of proclaims what God has told him to say to them. And there's just something, and it kind of ends with Jonah sitting under this tree in the sun, and he's like really hot and sweaty. It just kind of ends. It's like, what? What's going on here? You know, there are those stories in the Bible that are just kind of odd and absurd, and it's like, why did a whale swallow him up? Like, that was supposed to, like, either, depending on how you read the story, either punish him or protect him, right? And somehow God's using a whale, and then the story ends with him he's told the story, and he's sitting under this tree. It's like, it doesn't really resolve.
Right.
But I love that, because that's kind of life.
Interesting.
You know, like, the Bible, you talk about, like, fairy tale endings and people living happily ever after, or this neat and tidy resolution, or a neat answer to this problem. You're really not going to find that too often in the Bible, you know? Again, getting back to what I was saying earlier, it's just presenting humanity in all its messiness and all of its folly and in all of its, you know, screwiness, just kind of out there on full display to see. So I love the stories that really accent that.
Right.
You know, accent just the reality of life.
Do you think that's purposeful, or is that like author error, or just?
No, I think it's purposeful, which to me lends credence to the legitimacy and validity of the Bible, right? I mean, if I were writing a story about myself,
Right.
I might try to tidy it up, and like I would want to. This is maybe a function of the ego, right?
Right.
I would want the best picture of myself put forward to people.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be the Reverend Dr. Evan Dodge.
Yeah.
And these are all my accolades. These are all the things I've done. You know, all of this. And man, listen, if I had to sanitize my life, like 3/4 of it would get scrubbed away.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there's something to presenting it the way the Bible does present it. Tells me this stuff is this is real. You know, it's not sanitized. So I appreciate it for that.
So in comedy, the goal is to get a laugh. In preaching,
Yes.
is the goal, like if somebody cries, is that a success?
That certainly can be a success. Of course, obviously it's depending. I mean, if I'm in a text and it's humorous and I'm trying to do that and people are crying, then I'll be like, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You know, what's going on here?
Right.
You know, I do try at the beginning, either through like an anecdote, maybe I'll tell a joke, maybe bring in a personal story. I do try to be self-deprecating sometimes in my sermons, right?
Yeah.
Because again, I think of myself, to use another image or paradigm, I think of myself as a model, right? Now, I know I'm good looking, but I don't mean model. I don't mean model in that way. I mean, I'm setting the tone and an example. I'm modeling for people what it looks like to be a person who's deeply committed to Christian faith, but also struggles deeply with a lot of stuff, right? Yeah. And if I can be open and honest and transparent about that in a sermon, I found that's kind of this permission giving to other people to be like, oh, wow, if he can be vulnerable, then I can be open and vulnerable. And that's an environment I want to cultivate, right? Is where people feel like they can be real about life and not feel like they're going to be judged or that they're going to be spoken to harshly or that it will be kind of dismissed out of hand. That's a goal in preaching. I think I can set the tone for that, right? Yeah. So I try to model that maybe through an anecdote, through a humorous story where I like kind of pull out or lift up out of that story like my own screw up or my own foibles, you know. I think that can be really powerful for people.
In a way, it sounded like you are describing comedy too, like, because I mean, you take somebody like even Louis C.K., who's like the master of self-deprecation.
Yes,
it makes people walk away like, oh, I can feel that way too.
Yes, absolutely.
So I do feel like there's a big overlap there.
There's a huge overlap, and I think people, you know, if you dig deeply into it, and if you get exposed to a wide variety of preachers and a wide variety of comics, you see like the Venn diagram gets the overlap. Areas of those circles just expands more and more because again it really is it really is an art form.
Yeah,
you know, preaching really is an art form. Stand-up is an art form. You know, you're taking people on a journey with you,
right?
And you're being intimate and vulnerable. There's always, just like in stand-up, in preaching, there's times where you're just constantly walking that line where even one word or one sentence, you could just fall over the precipice and lose the people, or you'll just, you know, get them even more, and they'll be more kind of hanging on to every word you'd say, right? So I love that feeling, and there are times in preaching where it's a lot more acute than other times. But like when I'm like trying to thread a needle through a Bible text or make a point, and it's like I got to be really careful here because this could go off the rails. Kind of find that energizing and exciting. Do you find that in stand-up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still do enough to where I feel like, I mean, there's times where I've felt that for sure, but I'm still finding my voice up there as well. So, but it is fun with that.
That was the thing. You used a word there that's perfect for preaching is voice.
Yeah.
Because when I was in seminary taking preaching courses, and we would have to preach in front of the class, you know, and it would either be to adopt a particular preaching philosophy or to, you know, you can either choose a text or you're given this text to preach on, and you've got to do it in 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 8 minutes. I mean, all these different parameters just to practice your different preaching. Early on, preachers don't have much of a voice,
right?
You know, you're still trying to figure that out, and often you adopt other preachers' voices through your own study, listening to other sermons, whatever. I mean, it's hard not to, and same as stand-up. You're influenced by the people that you listen to and hang out with and study and all that. But eventually, kind of out of that kind of myriad group of voices that influence you, yours starts to emerge and develop, right? And you might be able to still see influences from different other preachers or comics in your own voice, but it becomes your voice,
right?
You know, and I think that's the preacher's goal, is to be able to, in your preaching, pay homage and respect to the people who've influenced you, but to also have your own distinct voice and style.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so there's classes where you preach in front of the
class?
class?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Now, some seminaries have more requirements than that for others, but we had to take, I took one preaching course that was required, and then I took an elective preaching course when I was in seminary. But then again, that's helpful, sure. But there's nothing like actually just getting out in front of a congregation and preaching week after week.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like it.
You got to get on stage, they say.
Absolutely. I mean, you could sit down, you could study stand up all day, right?
Yeah.
Until you actually get out and do it. It's very different.
Yeah.
And all that study and all that work will hopefully help you in that moment, but nothing will substitute for just actually getting out and trying it on.
Gone through all my questions. I guess my question, one of my last ones would be, do you ever plan to try stand up or?
My wife tells me that I should someday. Now, here's the thing. I mentioned a name. Probably my current favorite is Tim Dillon, right? And the reason I love Tim Dillon is he'll take a news headline and he'll just rant.
Right.
And I love that. But as a pastor, and there's a lot of things that maybe I'd like to say or that I think that I just can't really say out loud.
Right.
So I'd love to have a forum where in a different life, if I were in a different profession, I could just like rant about something. So I love rant style comedy, and I have a few pieces. I have at a church talent show at a former church where my wife actually was the pastor for a while. They did a talent show and I did a couple stand-up bits. I did one on when I we used to have chickens in the backyard, and one night you heard this ruckus in the chicken coop, and we'd seen a raccoon hanging around there. So this is like 1:30 in the morning. I pull out of bed, and I have a sleep apnea mask that I have to wear. So I pull off the hose. I have nothing but my underwear on. I look like a fat Bane, with this sleep apnea mask on. And I grab this baseball bat, and I run down the stairs, and I went out and just beat the tar out of this raccoon.
Really?
At least I thought I did. And it was dark. I missed it the whole time. And the raccoon got away and then came back the next night, ate another chicken.
Really?
Yeah, so I have a bit that I had done about that, and then one about dog handlers, dog people,
Nice.
which I'm still honing on that. But so I do have certain things, like I'll just get something in my head and I'll rant to my wife.
Right.
Because she's like the person I can rant to. And I'll rant, and then she'll be like, you've got to, she'll be wiping away tears. And she'll be like, you've got to, like, save that or remember that or do that someday. And I'll be like, I can't do this for anybody but you.
Yeah.
I can't say
Well, if you
what
ever
I'm
want to
thinking.
come to an open mic in New York, I'm down to go with you.
All right. Well, that would be a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, it would be.
That'd be cool. I've got, hey, there's precedent. Sam Kinison.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was a preacher turned comic, so maybe there's hope for me. There are some people who kind of, again, it's not either or.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
both and I love that.
That's really cool. Any message you want to leave everyone with? And where can we find you? That's also important.
I'm on Twitter a lot. Now, Twitter is the one social media platform where I do get a little bit closer to saying what I think about some things.
Okay.
So I'm at the Rev Dodger.
Okay.
At the Rev Dodger, REVDODGER. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Evan Dodge. You can find me there. Church is St. Paul's Brick.org, so you can check out our Sunday services. They're streaming online, and maybe find me dropping a joke or two in one of those sermons.
Cool.
So, yeah. I don't know. Last thing would just be, hey, religious people can have fun and laugh, and that's a good thing.
Cool. Shout out to my mom behind the camera.
We love you, Cheryl. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Reverend.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.